So, I remember the first time I wrote his time of death. It wasn't dramatic. That's the strange part. It was quiet. Just paperwork quiet. The lights were humming, the room smelled like disinfectant, and everything felt normal. Too normal. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. Breathing? Nothing. So I did what you're trained to do, what you're expected to do. I looked at my watch and I wrote it down. Time of death. And in that moment, it felt finished. Like the story had an ending.
So at that point, for you, it was just done.
Yeah, exactly. No doubt. No hesitation. I mean, why would there be? The body wasn't responding. There were no signs of life. So on paper, he was dead. But here's the part no one really prepares you for. Death doesn't always arrive cleanly. Sometimes it hesitates. Sometimes it leaves something behind. And I didn't know that yet. Not then. Because a few minutes later, something happened that shouldn't happen.
Wait, what do you mean shouldn't happen?
I mean, this. His body moved. Not a twitch, not a reflex. He took a breath, a real one. Air in, chest rising. And in that exact second, the number I had written down stopped being a fact. It became a problem. Because according to the report, he was already dead.
That's terrifying.
It is, because suddenly I wasn't looking at a body anymore. I was looking at a contradiction. A living person with an official time of death. And that's when it hit me. He didn't die once. He died twice.
You're saying,
Yeah. The first time, I declared him dead. The second time, his body made it final. And the part that still keeps me awake? The first death was on me. So when people hear this story, the first thing they think is, well, someone made a mistake. And I get that. It's the easiest explanation. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The first death made sense. Completely. Everything about it was logical. Textbook even. When I first examined him, there was no pulse, no spontaneous breathing, no response to stimuli. His skin tone had already changed. Not dramatically, but enough. That dull, slightly gray look you learn to recognize early in your career. And the environment, cold, quiet, still. Nothing about that room suggested urgency. So I followed the protocol. Not casually, carefully. Checked again. And again. Nothing changed.
so there really was no reason to doubt it.
No. And that's important, because doubt isn't something you're supposed to invent. It has to come from somewhere. At that moment, there was no signal, no warning, no red flag waving in the corner of the room. Just absence. And absence is convincing. People don't realize how powerful that is. When a body gives you nothing, you stop expecting something. You stop listening for movement. You stop watching the chest. Because death, most of the time, is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles.
So on paper, everything lined up.
Exactly. Vitals gone. No trauma suggesting immediate intervention. No signs of recent struggle. No obvious cause screaming for attention. So when I wrote that time down, I wasn't guessing. I was closing a chapter. And that's what everyone expects you to do. Families, hospitals, systems. They don't want hesitation. They want certainty. A number, a moment, an end.
Because an ending
Feel
feels safer.
Much safer. An ending means you can stop looking, stop worrying, stop hoping. Hope is exhausting in medical spaces. So the first death wasn't reckless. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't careless. It was reasonable. Which is why what happened next mattered so much. Because if the first death had been sloppy, this would be a different story. But it wasn't. It followed every rule.
And that's what makes it scary.
Yes. Because it means the system worked and still failed. And that's harder to accept than a simple error. When something breaks despite doing everything right, you don't know where to place the blame. So most people don't. They prefer to believe this kind of thing is rare, an anomaly, a fluke, but it isn't. It's just uncomfortable to talk about.
Because it means death isn't always clear.
Exactly. We like to imagine death as a switch, on, off. But sometimes it's a dimmer. And the problem is our paperwork doesn't have a setting for that.
So the first death wasn't wrong.
No, it was incomplete. And no one tells you how dangerous that can be. So there's a moment I still replay in my head. Not because it was loud, not because it was dramatic, but because it was wrong. We had already moved on. That's important to understand. The room had changed. The energy had shifted. People were quieter, slower. That specific calm that comes after certainty. I had already written the time, already stepped back mentally. And then there was movement. Not a gasp, not a dramatic inhale like in movies. Just a pause, a hesitation in the air. At first, I didn't even register it as breathing. It was too subtle, too soft. More like the body was remembering something.
Wait, you mean someone noticed it?
Not immediately. That's the disturbing part. When you decide someone is dead, your brain stops scanning for life. You stop listening, you stop watching the chest, you stop interpreting motion as meaningful, because meaning has already been assigned. But then, I saw it. A small rise, barely there, so slight you could miss it if you blinked. And I remember thinking, no, that's not possible. Not emotionally, clinically. It didn't fit.
What did you think it was?
At first, muscle release, residual movement, post-mortem reflex. Those things happen. Bodies don't go still instantly. But this wasn't that, because it repeated. Once. Then again. Slow, uneven, not rhythmic, not clean, but intentional.
That must have been terrifying.
It wasn't fear, it was confusion. Pure, sharp confusion. Because everything in my head was now split in two. One part saying, this person is dead, the other saying, this body is doing something only living bodies do. And those two things aren't supposed to coexist. I checked again. Pulse? Nothing. Stimulation? Nothing. Oxygen levels? Dangerously low, but not zero. And then, there it was. A shallow breath. So shallow, it felt almost embarrassed to exist, like it wasn't supposed to be seen.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's usually the reaction. Because people think death is a line. You cross it, and that's it. But this was someone standing on the line, and the line didn't know what to do. The room changed instantly. Certainty evaporated. That calm disappeared. Now everything was too loud, too bright, too fast. Someone said his name. Someone else froze. Another person stepped back. And all I could think was, how long has this been happening?
Meaning, how long had he been like that?
Exactly. Was this new, or had we simply stopped noticing? Because once you label a body as dead, you stop asking questions, and questions are what keep people alive. We moved immediately. Support, airway, oxygen. The body responded. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough. Enough to shatter the timeline we had just created.
So he wasn't dead.
He wasn't fully alive either, and that's the part people don't like, because it doesn't fit into language. We don't have a word that feels safe for that state. But what haunted me later wasn't the breath. It was the realization that the body had been trying to tell us something, and we almost didn't hear it.
Because everyone thought it was over.
Yes, because everyone wanted it to be over. And things are easier than ambiguity. But that breath, that quiet, stubborn breath, it refused the ending we gave it. And once that happens, nothing stays simple. You know, there's a moment after something like that happens. Not panic, not relief, a kind of silence. But it's not calm silence. It's unstable. Like the floor's still there, but you're no longer sure it can hold your weight. Because the second that breath happened, time stopped behaving the way we needed it to. Everything we had written down, everything we had agreed on. It didn't disappear. It just stopped making sense.
So the timeline was already wrong.
Yes, and worse than that, it was convincing, which is always dangerous. Up until that point, the story was clean. Collapse, no response, no pulse, time of death noted. It fit the witnesses, it fit the calls, it fit what everyone wanted the evening to be. But now we had a body that didn't respect the schedule. A body that said, "You decided too early."
That must change everything.
It does, but not in the way people imagine. People think, "Oh, okay, then you just correct the time." That's not how it works, because time isn't just a number, it's a structure. It holds everything else in place. When the time cracks, everything around it shifts. Who arrived first? Who arrived last? Who could have intervened? Who didn't? Suddenly, things that were too late aren't late anymore, and things that were impossible become possible.
That's terrifying.
It is, because now you're not fixing a mistake. You're reopening a reality. We went back to the beginning, replayed the calls, rechecked the logs, reread the note, and something subtle started to appear. Not a big error, a compression.
Compression?
Yes. Time had been squeezed. Events stacked too neatly, too efficiently, like someone had taken a long, messy process and flattened it. Real life doesn't behave like that. Bodies don't. Crises don't. There are delays, hesitations, failed attempts, moments that don't go anywhere. But our timeline had no wasted space. And that's when I knew. We hadn't discovered time. We had edited it
To make it cleaner?
to make it survivable for everyone watching. Because messy time is uncomfortable. It asks questions. It exposes hesitation. It forces responsibility. Clean time lets people move on. But the body didn't move on.
It stayed.
Yes, and it kept creating friction. We noticed it in the vitals, small inconsistencies, margins that shouldn't exist, oxygen levels that suggested something had been happening longer or shorter than the official version allowed.
So the clock wasn't just off.
No, it was telling the wrong story entirely. And the worst part, no one had lied. No one had manipulated anything. This wasn't corruption. It was momentum.
Momentum?
Once a narrative starts moving, it pulls everything with it. Notes get written to support it. Memories adjust to fit it. Details that don't align get softened. Not erased, just rounded off. And now that one breath, that one quiet breath, it had punched a hole through all of that.
So you had two versions of the same moment.
Exactly. One written, one lived, and they couldn't both be true. That's when time stops being helpful. It stops guiding, and it starts accusing.
Accusing who?
Everyone. Because once time breaks, you can't hide behind it anymore. You can't say it was too late, or there was nothing to be done. Now you have to ask, who was there? Who hesitated? Who assumed? Who decided it was over? And those questions, they don't care if the answers are uncomfortable.
So the breath didn't just save him.
No, it exposed us. It showed how close we came to mistaking an ending for a conclusion. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Because time, when it breaks, doesn't shatter loudly, it fractures quietly, and everything built on it starts to tilt. You know what's strange? Once a time of death is written down, the world moves incredibly fast. Not emotionally, administratively. Paperwork starts, calls get made, forms get signed. Words change. He becomes the body. The man becomes the deceased. Language shifts before reality does.
Even if he's still alive?
Yes, that's the part people don't realize. Death doesn't begin in the body. It begins in the system. Once it's written, everything reorganizes itself around that sentence. Time of death, cause of death, case status. It creates gravity, and gravity pulls everyone in the same direction.
So what happened next?
Everyone did what they were supposed to. That's what makes us uncomfortable. The emergency response shifted. The urgency softened. The questions narrowed. Not because anyone was careless, but because the story had already ended, on paper.
Even though his body hadn't.
Exactly. He was breathing. Barely. Inconsistently. But enough to matter. Yet the system had already moved past him.
That's chilling.
It should be. Because once a person is declared dead, attention changes. Presence changes. Responsibility changes. No one is with them anymore. They are processed. And the most dangerous moment is when a living body is treated like a concluded one.
Because no one's really watching anymore?
Yes, monitoring becomes confirmation. Observation becomes formality. People aren't asking what could still happen. They're asking, how do we document what already did? That's a very different mindset.
So he died? Once in reality and once in language?
No, the opposite. He died first in language. Reality just hadn't caught up. And that gap, that space between paper and physiology, that's where the real danger lives.
Because everyone trusts the paper.
They do, because paper feels stable, it feels objective, it feels finished. Bodies feel messy, unpredictable, demanding, inconvenient. So when there's a conflict, people side with the document.
Even if the document is wrong.
Especially if it's wrong, because correcting it means admitting that the system moved too fast. And systems hate slowing down.
What was happening to him during all this?
His body was doing what bodies do when they're not finished, fighting quietly. Small breaths, irregular, shallow. Moments where nothing happened, followed by moments where something did. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just persistence.
And no one expected that.
No, because expectation had already been closed. Once death is declared, life becomes an anomaly. And anomalies don't get resources. They get explanations.
That sounds backwards.
It is, but it's very human. We prefer certainty over vigilance. We prefer closure over attention. And that's how someone can be alive in a room that's already moved on.
So when people later ask, how could this happen?
The answer is simple. Nothing went wrong all at once. Everything went wrong a little. Assumptions stacked, language hardened, attention drifted, and the body was left behind.
That's heartbreaking.
It is, because the body never asked for much. Just time, just observation, just a chance not to be finished yet.
And instead,
It was treated like a conclusion. That's why I say this man died twice, once on paper and almost in reality.
almost.
Almost is the most dangerous word in medicine, because it means someone noticed, just barely, in time. And if they hadn't, no one would have questioned it, because the story was already written. And stories, once written, they're very hard to interrupt. People imagine the fight for life as something loud, gasping, convulsions, chaos. But most of the time, it isn't like that. Most of the time, the body fights quietly. No drama, no warning, just persistent. That's what was happening here. His body wasn't resisting in a way that demanded attention. It was resisting in a way that asked for patience, breath by breath, moment by moment. And patience is something systems don't have much of.
So there were signs, but they weren't obvious.
Exactly. Nothing that screamed, nothing that forced a pause. Just subtle inconsistencies. A breath that didn't fully stop, a chest that still moved. Reflexes that hadn't completely surrendered. Things you only notice if you're not already convinced the story is over. But once death has been declared, you stop looking for life.
Because you think it's finished.
Yes, and the body becomes background noise. That's the cruel irony. The body was still communicating, just not in a language people wanted to hear anymore.
What was it saying?
It was saying, not yet. Not loudly, not clearly, but consistently. Every shallow breath was a delay. Every reflex was a contradiction. The body wasn't trying to prove anything. It was just continuing.
That feels almost tragic.
It is, because the body doesn't know it's inconvenient. It doesn't know it's slowing people down. It doesn't know that paperwork has already been filled out. It just follows physiology, and physiology hadn't reached its end.
So what stopped people from noticing?
Context. Context is powerful. Once everyone believes the same thing, they stop interpreting details independently. They interpret them through the story. A shallow breath becomes residual movement. A twitch becomes post-mortem activity. A pause becomes expected. Everything gets reclassified,
Even signs of life.
especially signs of life, because they don't fit anymore. And humans are very good at ignoring things that don't fit.
So the body kept going, and no one was really listening.
Yes, that's what makes this hard to talk about. There was no villain, no moment of cruelty, just momentum. The quiet kind. The kind that carries you forward even when you shouldn't be moving.
How long did that fight last?
Longer than people think. Not long enough to change everything on its own, but long enough that it mattered. Long enough that someone could have noticed. Long enough that the story didn't have to end the way it almost did.
Almost.
Almost. That word again. Medicine is full of almosts. Almost survived. Almost noticed. Almost corrected. And every almost carries a weight.
Because it means it could have gone the other way.
Yes. And that's uncomfortable because it means outcomes aren't always inevitable. Sometimes they're just unattended.
That's a hard thought.
It is, because it means the difference between life and death isn't always skill or knowledge or intent. Sometimes it's attention.
And attention was missing.
Yes, not maliciously, not deliberately, but structurally. The system had already decided he was finished, so it stopped asking the body.
And the body kept answering anyway.
It did, quietly, patiently, until someone finally noticed the mismatch.
And when that happened,
Everything felt suddenly wrong, because now the story cracked. If he was still fighting, then he hadn't died when they said he did. And if that was true, then nothing about the timeline was stable anymore.
that realization must have been terrifying.
It was, because now the question wasn't what happened, it was how did we miss this?
And that question doesn't have an easy answer.
No, because the answer is uncomfortable. We missed it because we stopped looking, because a story felt finished, because certainty felt safer than doubt.
So this quiet fight, it wasn't just physical.
No, it was against momentum, against assumption, against the human desire to move on.
And the body almost lost.
Almost. And that's why this matters, because almost dying is still living, and living deserves attention.
Even when it's inconvenient?
Especially then, because that's when it's most fragile. There's always a moment, not a big one, not a dramatic one, just a pause where someone hesitates, where the routine breaks for half a second. That's what happened here. Someone looked again, not because they were suspicious, not because they felt something was wrong, but because something didn't feel finished.
Like an instinct?
Yeah, exactly like that. An instinct people usually silence, the kind you ignore because it slows you down. But this time, they didn't. They noticed the chest, noticed that it wasn't completely still. It wasn't dramatic, just subtle, a rhythm that didn't belong to a dead body.
And that's when things changed.
Yes, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Your brain scrambles, because now something impossible is happening. Someone who's supposed to be gone isn't.
What do you do in that moment?
You freeze, not physically, mentally, because now you're standing between two realities, the one everyone agreed on and the one in front of you. And they can't both be true.
That's terrifying.
It is, because if the body is still alive, then the story collapses. Not gently, violently. Every decision before that moment comes into question.
So someone had to act.
Yes, and acting meant admitting something unthinkable, that they might have been wrong.
About the time.
About everything, because death isn't just a state. It's a declaration. And declarations are powerful. They organize people. They justify actions. They stop processes. Undoing one is chaos.
So what happened next?
Verification. Careful, slow, almost hesitant. Checking reflexes, checking response, checking breath. And each check made the silence heavier because the body kept responding.
Meaning,
Meaning he hadn't died. Not yet, not when they said he had. And that realization spreads fast, not outward, inward. You feel it in your stomach, in your chest. That cold understanding that something has gone very wrong.
Wrong how?
Because now there are two deaths, the one that was declared and the one that almost happened because of it.
That's hard to even process.
It is, because medicine is built on precision, and here, precision failed.
So the system had to reverse.
Yes, procedures stop, phones ring, orders change. Everything that was moving forward suddenly slams into reverse, and people don't like that.
Because it exposes fragility.
Exactly. It exposes how thin the line really is between living and being treated as dead.
And he crossed that line twice.
Almost. And that almost matters, because now the question isn't, why did he die? It's, how close did we come to letting him?
That's chilling.
It should be, because it forces a confrontation, not with violence, not with intent, but with process, with assumption, with speed.
So this wasn't just a medical moment.
No, it was an ethical one, because once you realize someone is still alive, you realize how easily they could have been ignored.
And that stays with you.
Forever. Because now you know, silence isn't proof, stillness isn't certainty, and death is not always where we think it is.
So this was the moment everything broke open.
Yes, because from here on, nothing could be trusted without rechecking, especially the time, especially the story, especially ourselves. You know, people think death is a moment, like a switch, on, off. But in reality, death is a process, and sometimes it happens more than once.
That's what you mean when you say he died twice.
Yes, the first time was almost physical. The second time was something else entirely. Because even after we realized he was alive, the machinery had already started.
Machinery.
Yeah, paperwork, protocols, assumptions, language. Once a death is declared, it sets things in motion that don't stop easily,
Even if the declaration was wrong?
especially then. Because systems don't like uncertainty. They prefer errors over pauses. So even as people were reacting, correcting, adjusting, the story of his death had already been told.
To who?
To nurses, to staff, to administrators, to records, in some cases, to family.
That's brutal.
It is, because now you're not just reversing a medical call. You're asking people to undo an emotional reality, to take back something they've already felt.
And people resist that.
They do, not out of cruelty, out of instinct. Because grief, once it starts, it doesn't like to be interrupted.
So what happens to him during all this?
He becomes secondary. That's the uncomfortable truth, because attention shifts from the body to the mistake, from the patient to the process.
Meaning he's alive but treated like a problem.
Yes, a complication, something that shouldn't exist because his survival threatens the narrative.
That's terrifying.
It is, because now he's alive in a space designed for the dead. Not physically, but structurally. People don't know how to talk to him yet, what to call him, how to write about him. He exists in a gap.
Between categories.
Exactly. And gaps are dangerous because responsibility blurs there.
So what do you do?
You stabilize, not just his body, but his status. You reassert life, again. You document it. You confirm it. You say it out loud. He is alive.
That feels strange to have to say.
It is, but once death has been spoken, life has to be reintroduced deliberately. Otherwise, the system keeps moving forward without you.
And that's the second death?
Yes, the moment where a person is alive, but no longer fully recognized as such, where their existence is inconvenient, where they don't fit the form anymore.
That sounds dehumanizing.
It is, because identity is fragile, and death erases it fast. Bringing it back takes effort, and effort is something systems avoid.
So his life depended on more than medicine.
Yes, it depended on someone insisting, someone saying, no, stop, look again, someone refusing to let momentum decide.
That's a heavy responsibility.
It is, because if no one does that, the second death completes itself.
Without anyone noticing.
Exactly. No violence, no intent, just continuation. And that's the most dangerous kind.
Because it feels normal.
Yes, and normal things don't trigger alarms. They just happen.
So he survived the first death, but almost didn't survive the second.
That's right. And that's the part people rarely talk about because it's not dramatic, it's procedural, it's quiet, but it leaves scars,
Even if he lived?
especially if he lived, because being declared dead changes how you're seen, even after it's corrected. Some things don't fully reverse.
Like what?
Trust, certainty, the feeling of safety. Once you realize how close you came, you never forget it.
So the second death, it's not about the body.
No, it's about recognition, about being counted as alive, about not being erased by assumption.
And that's almost what happened.
Yes, and that's why this case stayed with me. Not because someone nearly died, but because of how easily they nearly disappeared. You know, people assume that once a mistake is corrected, everything goes back to normal. Like you just rewind, fix a line, move on. But that's not how it works.
Because something already happened.
Exactly. Even if the body survives, the moment doesn't disappear. It settles, quietly, and it changes things in ways that don't show up on charts.
Like what?
Like trust. Trust in the system, trust in your own senses, trust in the idea that someone is really watching. Once you've been declared dead, even briefly, something breaks.
Even if everyone apologizes?
Especially then, because apologies don't undo awareness. They just acknowledge it.
Awareness of how close it was.
Yes, and how easily it could have gone the other way. That realization stays.
So what happens to him afterward?
He lives, physically, but there's a hesitation now in how people approach him, in how carefully they speak, and how often they double-check.
That sounds like caution.
It is, but it's also distance, because people don't know where to place him anymore.
What do you mean?
Well, he crossed the boundary most people never cross, even symbolically. And once that happens, you don't fit cleanly into categories.
Alive?
Yes, but with an asterisk.
That's unsettling.
It is, because systems love clarity. Alive, dead, in treatment, discharged. He disrupted that.
By existing.
By existing at the wrong moment in the wrong place, according to the paperwork.
So even survival can be inconvenient.
Very. Especially when it contradicts certainty. Because certainty is comfortable. Surprises are not.
How did he react?
That's the part people don't ask enough. Because they focus on the error, not the person. He was quiet. Not angry, not dramatic, just observant.
Observant of what?
Of how people looked at him. Of how conversations changed when he entered the room. Of how explanations were offered before he asked.
That's uncomfortable.
It is. Because once you realize you were almost erased, you start noticing how fragile presence really is.
So the consequence isn't physical.
No, it's existential. You begin to understand that being alive isn't just biological. It's administrative, social, narrative.
And those things can fail.
Yes, without malice, without intention, just through momentum.
That's scary.
It should be, because it means safety depends on attention, and attention is a limited resource.
So what stays with him?
The knowledge that life can be misread, that certainty can be wrong, and that silence isn't always peaceful.
Sometimes it's dangerous.
Exactly. And once you know that, you don't unknow it.
So even though he lived, something was taken.
Yes, the illusion of invulnerability, the belief that systems catch everything, the comfort of assuming someone will always notice.
That's heavy.
It is. And it's why this case never felt resolved to me. Because survival isn't the same as restoration.
That's a powerful distinction.
It matters, because when people say at least he lived, they miss what didn't come back with him.
which is
certainty. And certainty, once gone, doesn't return quietly.
so the second death, it leaves a mark.
Always. Even when no one talks about it. Even when the charts look fine. Even when the story moves on.
But the person doesn't.
No, they carry it, like a memory they didn't ask for.
And that's the cost.
Yes, the quiet cost, the kind that never shows up in reports. You know, people always ask the same thing at the end. So, what happened after? As if the story continues in a straight line. As if there's a clean next chapter.
And there isn't?
Not really, because some stories don't continue. They just stop changing. They settle into something quieter, something you carry,
Even if no one else does.
especially then. That's the part people misunderstand. They think the danger is the moment you're declared dead, but that's not it. The danger is what happens when the system feels done with you.
Even if you're still breathing.
Yes, because once a conclusion is written, people stop looking. And not looking is powerful.
More powerful than being wrong?
Sometimes, because being wrong can be corrected. Not looking can't.
So, in this case, the mistake wasn't the declaration itself.
No, the mistake was believing it ended there. Believing correction meant closure.
But closure never really came.
No, because something had already shifted. A line had been crossed, not medically, existentially.
That's a strong word.
It has to be. Because once you've been placed on the wrong side of certainty, you don't fully come back.
Even if the paperwork changes.
Paperwork is fast. Reality is not. Reality lingers.
So, what does this case really leave us with?
A question, not about death, about attention, about how quickly we decide, about how much we trust conclusions that arrive too early.
And about who pays the price.
Yes, always someone,
Even when no one meant to cause harm.
especially then, because intention isn't required for damage, only momentum.
That's uncomfortable.
It should be. Comfort has nothing to do with truth. Truth is quiet, patient, uninterested in our need for ending.
So, when people say, at least he lived,
They're not wrong, but they're not finished, because survival isn't the opposite of loss. Sometimes it's just another form of it.
and the second death, it never really gets named.
No, it doesn't get a certificate, it doesn't get a time, it just happens. Quietly, in the space between certainty and correction.
So, what stays with you?
The realization that bodies don't argue. They don't insist. They don't perform. They just remain consistent.
Even when
Everything else changes.
changes.
Exactly. And consistency, that's what eventually exposes fragile story.
Even if it takes time.
Especially if it takes time, because time reveals what urgency hides.
So, this story, it doesn't really end.
No, it just stops pretending it has.
That feels very TDDL.
It is, because the dead don't lie. They don't exaggerate. They don't rush. They wait.
For someone to listen.
Yes, that's all they ever ask.
And if we don't,
Then the story doesn't disappear. It just waits longer.
that's unsettling.
It should be, because silence isn't empty. It's full of things we chose not to hear.
So, if this stayed with you, if it felt heavy, if it followed you a little,
That's not an accident. That's what happens when certainty breaks.
this was The Dead Don't Lie. If you want to stay with these stories, if you don't want to miss the next ones, you can subscribe. It's free, and it supports the work we're doing here.
Because the next story won't ask louder questions, just earlier ones.
Until then, listen carefully.
The body already told you.
You just have to be willing to hear it.